When I was about 9, my brothers and I stayed at my grandparents' for a weekend. They lived out in the boondocks in an area that had just been cleared and started to become developed. They were the fourth house built there, but the neighborhood next to the area was fully developed and populated. One night, we, along with my grandparents, aunt, and 3 brothers, were all sitting outside in the light of a light post that was next to our house and by the still dirt road. We were watching a TV that was sitting on the window still, but pointed outside. Those were warm nights in Mexico, so we sat outside in the cool breeze of the night. Out of nowhere, we started to hear a lot of barking. The dogs from the neighborhood nearby had started barking at something all at once. The barking reached the second neighborhood, and immediately the barking became an army. I've never heard anything like it since. So many dogs barking at once, some crying, some howling, just pure insanity. Suddenly, we realized the dogs were coming in a huge mass down the streets towards us. We all jumped up to attention and just stared down the street. There, by the light of the farthest light post, a group of dogs came into view, and then more, and then more. The street was covered in dogs, except for one spot, right in the middle. They were all barking at the spot. My grandfather quickly grabbed his shotgun and walked right towards the mass of barking chaos. He thought it was a wild animal that the dogs were chasing. He was one light post distance away when he stopped, put his shotgun down, and walked back to us. He told my grandma, "This is of no use here," gesturing at the shotgun. "This one is on you." My grandmother was an extremely devoted Catholic and carried her Bible everywhere. It sat by the TV, and she rushed over to grab it and quickly looked for a page on it. The dogs reached the light post my grandfather was at earlier, and we saw it. There, in the middle of the dog pack, a woman walking down the street. She got closer, and I saw what my grandfather saw. She was floating about a foot off the ground. She was still making the gesture of walking, but her feet were nowhere near the ground. The dogs would take turns trying to bite her feet, but upon their attempt, they would cry as if hurt and run back, and another dog would take its turn, and so on and on. My aunt became terrified and grabbed us kids. She tried to cover our eyes and yelled at us to not look at it. It became evident to me that this was a serious thing happening when she, my aunt, a non-Catholic, started praying. We were more curious than anything, weirded out by the scene, but not scared yet. My grandmother had started praying, and the dogs dissipated when they reached her. They just ran off in all directions. About 60 or more dogs that were still there. That's when I saw her up close, and my life changed. She had wavy hair that was flowing behind her as she walked, and no face, nothing, like a blur, but it was flat, hard to describe. The terror overtook me at that point, and I couldn't look away. Her dress was like an old-timey summer dress that covered the shoulders and dropped just above her ankles. I could almost see a print on it. Her feet were transparent, as was the bottom of her dress that trailed behind her like smoke, but not like smoke, like it was torn. She had a slight glow to her, like she was walking in midday, but her color was gone. She was pale, her dress was pale, and her hair was white, and no face. Our cries at that point triggered both my grandfather and my aunt to pull us into the house. As I was making my way into the house, I looked back and saw my grandmother holding her Bible and comforting this being face to face. We could hear a woman screaming very loudly and suddenly crying and cursing. We looked out the window to see the woman in white rapidly float over a nearby drainage canal and disappear. My grandmother walked back inside with a big grin on her face, and all she said was, "Don't worry, she won't be back." I was forced to become a believer that day. I didn't ask for it, nor did I want it. I suddenly was just a believer. Now I'm 23, and looking back on it, I feel like what I saw that night was the infamous La Llorona, a ghostly woman that walks around the streets of Mexico at night looking for her lost children that she drowned when she was still alive. I'm just glad that we made it out. When I was about 7, my parents separated and my mom moved from Nevada to Idaho with me and my 4 siblings, and my dad went to California. After a few months of staying with my aunt, we found a 5-bedroom, 2-bath house to rent with a huge backyard with a rope swing out back. It was a pretty nice little house, but it was just a little old. And so I'm in this house, and when you walked in there was a living room, which connected to a dining room, which connected to a kitchen, which also connected to a hallway behind the living room. Around 4 feet from the start of the hallway was a basement where my 2 older brothers lived, and at the end was my mother's room, and to the right of my mom's room were 2 rooms across from each other next to my mom's room. Mine and my younger brother's room, and the one across was my 4-year-old sister's room. Well, about a year or so into having this house, we had gotten a dog that we named Oliver. He is a mini golden doodle. Well, one night, when he was about 6 months old, it was around 3:30 in the morning, and I was dead asleep. Me and my brother were on bunk beds. I was on top, he was on bottom, and me and Oliver were sleeping. Anyways, dead asleep, me and him suddenly get awoken and sit up. My door had been violently slammed open, and all I could see out was black. My heart jumps into my throat as I look into the hallway. I finally muster the courage to jump down and investigate. I see my younger brother was dead asleep and was not awoken by this, so I look down the hall and it's silent. No one seemed to be awake. Now, like any young boy, I thought this is my older brothers playing a prank on me. But then I think, why would they be up this late on a school night? So I peek into the basement, and there's nothing but snoring and darkness. So now I'm scared as hell, and I peek into the kitchen from the laundry room by the connection of the hallway to the kitchen, and from this view you can see the oven, a bar, sink, and dining room, which included a window and a sliding glass door. And from the window I saw a man in black kind of hurrying out, and now there was a gate right between our backyard and driveway, so I assumed he hopped it because I didn't hear any loud metallic noise. And then my heart sinks, and I immediately run to my mom and start sobbing frantically, trying to describe what happened. And she looked and saw muddy footprints in our kitchen, which led to footsteps on our hallway carpet to my room. 3 weeks later, there was a man arrested in our neighborhood for being involved in a human trafficking ring. And we don't know this for sure, but we are positive that this was the same man that entered our house that night, looking to kidnap one of us. We stayed in that house another 4 years and never had an encounter like this ever again. It still makes me wonder though, what would have happened if I didn't wake up when the door was slammed open. This story takes place in late 2016, the year Pokemon Go came out and the time the game had huge hype around it. So me being 12 years old, who wanted to play a game what everyone else was playing, I got the game myself and I really enjoyed it. One of my friends also played the game, and we had the idea of having a sleepover at my house and have our own Pokemon adventure together. We both thought it was going to be a lot of fun. So we got it organized, and my friend, who I will call Dan, stayed over at my house. For the day, we messed around, ate snacks, played video games on my PS4, etc. It was at 10 p.m. when Dan suggested we go out and play Pokemon Go. I brought up that it was too late, but he persisted. So I asked my mom if it was fine, and she said it was. Sure, I had my concerns and all, but I honestly thought nothing bad would happen. This was due to the fact that I live in a small and quiet town. No one would be out this late, so it wasn't like we were going to get mugged in an alley. So we grabbed our phones and headed down the main street of my town. We walked past the cemetery, then past the football oval. But as we passed the football oval, we saw a black Ford Territory parked by it. No lights were on, so we didn't think anyone was inside it, so we walked past it. We got onto the footpath past the oval when we noticed the Ford pulled up next to us on the footpath. We found it strange, but kept walking anyway. We were passing the post office when we saw the same Ford pull into the parking lot in front of the post office. This gave us the suspicion that this random car was following us, so we kept walking, but at a faster pace. We walked past the post office, and were now walking past our town park. As we were walking by the park, Dan told me to hide behind the bushes, which surrounded the park entrance. As we crouched down behind the bushes, we saw the Ford pull out of the parking entrance, confirming 100% that this Ford was following us. After what felt like an eternity for me, the Ford drove off, and we got out of the park and started running back to my house. As we started running back to the house, I looked behind me to make sure the Ford was gone, and what I saw horrified me. The car turned left at the end of the street. I originally thought that maybe he was just leaving the town, but then I realized this park has two main entrances. The way he turned, he was driving to the second entrance, meaning he believed we ran out to the other side of the park and was trying to cut us off that way. There was no argument left. This guy wasn't following us for the safety purposes or etc. He was chasing us. I am not an athletic person, unlike my friend Dan, but in this instant, I was keeping up with him on the sheer amount of fear of what will happen if this driver caught us, or what his intentions were with us. We ran past the post office, past the football oval, and we were halfway past the cemetery when we saw the headlights of the Ford behind us, and I was terrified. There was nowhere to hide. It was a footpath with a giant fence separating the footpath and the cemetery. There was nothing to hide behind. Luckily enough, Dan came up with an idea. He pointed out we were both wearing dark hoodies. He said to put the hood over our heads, crouch down, and pretend to be rocks. At the time, I thought it was an absolute stupid idea, but that was all we had. So we did just that, pretending to be rocks. And surprisingly enough, the Ford drove past us, no slowing down at all, which means this stupid plan actually worked. After he drove off, We continued booking it. We were at the end of the cemetery when we saw him driving our way again. This time, there was a bin to hide behind, which we did. He drove past us again, and we continued booking it. We got to my house and locked the door behind us to ensure some kind of safety. We explained to my mom what happened, and after that day, she made some new rules. No more playing Pokemon Go at night, and my little sister was not allowed to go out by herself to play it. She wasn't happy about that, but at the very least, we are still here to tell this very story.